This is my recollection of life on a lighthouse in 1958 as a U.S. Coast Guard engineman. Conimicut Light off Warwick, Rhode Island. One of the last kerosene-powered lights in the United States of America. I had help compiling this video by several gentlemen who are in the lighthouse preservation business or currently authors, and I use their pictures, and if there are any pictures for which I didn't give credit, I apologize. We'll pretend you're coming to the light from Bristol, Rhode Island. As you come up the channel, you work your way around the light. Get ready to land it up here. And I spot the tug and I say to Joe, "Hey, I think we got visitors. There's the vessel you came up on. Chief Pickett brought you up for a visit. Here you are at the first level, our galley, our kitchen. We spent a lot of time here. You might note up near the ceiling, there's tube. We were running electricity. Getting ready for electricity. The hand pump at the sink connected to the cistern where we collected rainwater for fresh water. But that wasn't my first light. Warwick Neck was my first light. The keeper, civilian keeper there, Harry Wilbur, came down with pneumonia, and they sent me to be his relief light keeper. His wife, Helen, could have easily have run the light. The tall, giant man you see in the center of the photograph is Harry Wilbur. After he got done building the Mount Hope Bridge, he joined the lighthouse service. And he and Helen got married in Rockport, Mass. And the way she tells the story, they walked down to the end of the pier. She ducked under the spray hood of the station boat, and they went out to Rockport, Thatcher's Island, Twin Lights, and began their life. Warwick Neck and from their life story, is where I got the appreciation for the tradition of the lighthouse service and a real culture of family lights and light keeping. So that later, when I got assigned to Conimicut, I had that interest in tradition. The chief on the tug that brought me up that day said to me, "What kind of trouble did you get into, kid?" I said, "I've only been in for 9 months. I haven't had time to get into much trouble." He said, "This isn't the best station to be stationed at. You'll be stepping back in time to one whole century when you climb off this tug. Let's take a quick run upstairs. I'll show you each of the rooms going up. This is just above the galley is our day room office. You notice there's an electrical plug. We're getting ready for electricity when this picture was taken. The third level was the crew's berthing. my bunk, and I shared this room with several different seamen over the years I was there, from 58 to 61. Whoops, went too far. That's This is my workshop. You see all the hand tools. There were no power tools because there wasn't any power. So I learned to use the tools that I knew as a child. The next level was the watch room with the antique fog bell striker machine you see in the lower right. The batteries were for powered our ship-to-shore radio, our only connection with the outside world. That machine was connected to the bell, a gigantic iron bell that rang every 15 seconds in poor visibility. The arrow points to Nahant Light on the Barrington shore. An inactive light we'll explain more later. And level 6 is the lantern room. Some people argue that it should just be called the lantern, but that's antique incandescent oil vapor lamp from the very early 1900s, and the lens, of course, goes back to the 1800s. It had originally been at Nahant Point and had been moved over to Conimicut. And it's a long way down. But why did they build a light here? The area that's shaded in blue and outlined is the watershed that flows past Conimicut Light every day. All the way from Worcester, the Blackstone River, the Patuxent, Moshassuck, Woonasquatucket, Seekonk, all that water comes by into this narrow gap that leads to Providence, the port of Providence. Oops, like too many fingers, oh man. You can see in this closer look from Google Earth, you can see the sandbar that runs out to Conimicut. Upper right-hand corner, that's where Nahant Light, the first light at this area, and you can see a shoal off there, and you see how narrow the passage is between those two obstructions. It's also the convergence of the west and east passage. Narragensett Bay has two approaches. The west passage was eventually used by the Navy and an aircraft carrier base, an air station. The east passage was used by the Navy and their destroyer fleet. Sometimes it was a long way to Conimicut Point. In bad weather, it could seem like 1,000,000 miles. These are some postcards that friends have gifted to me of the light in different time frames and different. But the history. I mentioned Nahant Point. That was established first in 1828, but it was inadequate in that it didn't define the channel very well. So a daymark was built on the sandbar at Conimicut. But the winter ice would take anything away, destroy anything. Large ice flows would come down the bay and wipe stuff right off the point. So it was replaced by a spar buoy, which was an inexpensive alternative. But that was inadequate too, and so a lighted stone tower was constructed, and the keeper from Nahant would row out and tend the light and row back to his home at Nahant. That was improved as Nahant began to deteriorate, and a new stone tower eventually had a dwelling attached to it at the site of Conimicut Light. But it only lasted one winter. The ice destroyed the dwelling, seriously damaged the tower, and the keeper, Harold Horace Arnold, and his son ended up floating down Narragensett Bay on the ice floe and were rescued by a tug that was in the bay. And so Congress eventually made funds available to build the cast iron spark plug light that you see today. Now, Jeremy wrote a book about ghosts and haunted lighthouses. And he asked me about whether we had any ghostly occasions or incidents. And I told him, no, not really. We knew that Mr. Powell, the last civilian keeper at Conimicut, had died of a heart attack at the dayroom landing, and his wife was bedridden, and the light didn't display that night, and so they came out to take a look at what was going on, and they found his body, and they found his poor wife in terrible condition in bed, and but we never really thought about ghosts. But if we'd known about Mrs. Nellie Smith and what she did to herself and her kids on that day in 1909, we might have been a little more sensitive to things that poltergeists. She told her husband that she wouldn't stay at Conimicut any longer, and if he didn't transfer it to another light, she'd kill herself. And one day, when he was away on business in Providence, she actually did take poison, and she gave poison to her 2 children. And when he returned, he found her dead and the younger child dead. The older boy was critically ill, managed to get him ashore and administered an antidote, and he went on to live. A real tragedy. But when I got to the light, my boss was Joseph Backen. Born in 1911, he was 47, and he looked to be 74. In the family photograph, the little boy sitting on his father's knee is my boss, Joe Backen, in 1915. He was born on Execution Rocks Light out in Long Island Sound, and had lived on Warwick Neck Light, and he actually had slept in the same room that I slept in when I was there with the Wilburs. He was he was on lights in Maine mostly, and in 1939, when the Coast Guard took over the lighthouse service, he enlisted in the Coast Guard. His last station before Conimicut was Goat Island off of Kennebunk, and these pictures are family pictures of his son and daughter, and the only picture I have of him is this distant picture of he and his wife and the two kids and another visitor that I never was able to identify. The tug that you came up on was our lifeline, really. Brought us our supplies, and what else can I say? Talking about the antique equipment at Conimicut Light, I suppose you could say Joe was part of the antique equipment because he had served on so many primitive lights that he knew how to operate all the old stuff. And he taught me how to, and he was a little standoffish when I first came aboard, but after he realized that I respected his knowledge and his history, we became quite friendly. This is the Gamewell Fog Bell Striker. That's a blueprint of the machinery. You see the chain and hook and weights. It was weight powered, like a wind-up clock, and it would ring every 15 seconds. And after 2 hours of that, it needed to be wound. It took about 10 minutes of winding to recover 2 hours worth of run time. This is a fourth order lamp that preceded the IOV. You can imagine the limited amount of light given off by such an aluminum apparatus. This is the last year they gave instructions for how to the parts list for the 35 millimeter IOV. It operated this way. 2 tanks, one of compressed air and one of very pure, highly filtered kerosene in the watch room would supply kerosene under 40 pounds pressure to a valve that was connected to the fitting at 1. And that liquid kerosene would rise in the tube and be heated to a vapor, and then the vapor would be released through a pinpoint nozzle at 3 into the Bunsen tube, and it would burn with a almost invisible blue flame, and that flame would heat the fragile mantle to an incandescence that would produce a large amount of candle power. It would require preheating at 2 before the mantle would be included. As to lenses, the Fresnel lenses, I recommend this book by Teresa. It's a very interesting story, how the rest of the world was using Fresnel lenses, and the United States was still using polished reflectors, which weren't very good. But politics were involved, and the United States was slow to update. This is a fourth order lens from Owl's Head in Maine. There are several Fresnel lenses still in business, still being used. And this is the way they work. The upper and lower prisms, the triangular prisms, capture light energy and transmit and reflect it out into change the direction of the light. The central lens, the light is refracted, just not reflected, but just bent enough so it becomes parallel. And so the lens focuses all the available light in one direction. I won't get into quantum physics, but light is both waves and particles, and Fresnel managed to capture that idea. Well, the advantages of being on a light in the middle of the bay, well, if you like fish, it was a pretty good place to be. I also had a pair of quahog tongs so we could have chowder anytime we wanted. Fishing was something we did on a regular basis. Traffic on the bay. This is an example of the summertime when recreational boaters frequent the bay. This photograph was taken by a Journal Bulletin photographer, and I don't know who he was. I'm sorry for that. This was taken in 1963. The boat is an S boat, S class. Oh, I missed one. There was a lot of commercial traffic in those days because Providence was a very active port. There was a large wholesale lumber facility. We had shiploads of lumber come in at least once a month. Of course, the big tank farms, oil tank farms, Gulf, Citgo, Esso, in East Providence, all required big tankers coming in. This is a container ship, a fairly recent picture. So there was a lot of commercial traffic by the light. They'd pick up a pilot at the mouth of the bay, and he would guide the vessels to Providence. Well, when you're a teenager and you're kind of free to do whatever you want, you can get into trouble or foolishness. One day on my way back to the light with the outboard motor, I snagged something, and when I shut the engine down and and checked and found out it was a lot of string. And I pulled it all into the boat, and it had a kite frame attached to one end of it. And I brought it out to the light and dried the string, thinking I could save the string, and at least we'd have some string for something. And then I got the foolish idea that I could paper the frame and maybe I could try and fly the kite. And I actually did. It was a struggle because the wind wraps around the tower, and I would get it up a little ways, and then it would get caught in the downdraft and go crash like Charlie Brown's kite. And I eventually did get it free and clear, and I ended up tying it off to the rail and at night, and I went to bed, and the next morning it was still flying. Eventually, the wind died down enough so that it sagged and went to a watery death. Another thing that could have done me serious harm was I got the crazy idea that if I sat on the edge of the rail where the black arrow is and held on to a rope that was tied to the hook on the crane at the dock, I could swing out Tarzan style and drop into the bay. Well, the only time I tried it, the rope slipped through my hands, taking a lot of skin with it. I ended up on the rocks and the barnacles, banged up, but no serious damage. But it was a foolish thing to do. We took great pride in Joe had retired, and the new officer in charge was a first-class boatswain mate named Sam Edwin Harris. He was from Texas, so everybody called him Tex. Tex and I took a lot of pride in the light, and we had a new group commander who was sympathetic to the situation, so that any project we wanted to do, he was willing to supply the funds. So we retiled the galley, and we got new cabinets, and we took pride in the fact that we kept it shiny and white. And over the winter, nearly every winter, it would get rusty, especially at the seams of the cast iron panels. And so we would chip away the old paint and paint with red lead and white. And our extension ladder only would reach to so high, and so to work underneath the overhang of the bell deck or places above our extension ladder, we would tie a ladder to the rail and climb down the ladder and then around to the inside and then work over our shoulder, kind of. But we did have kind of like a homemade safety harness in case we lost our footing. Some people thought it was a daring thing to do. What did you do in your free time? Well, one of the things I did was I got a reading list from a undergraduate at a college that I knew, and I read the reading list. I also took courses with correspondence courses with the Coast Guard for advancement. But it was all by the light of an Aladdin kerosene lamp. We did have a radio, a battery-powered Sears Roebuck Farm radio, and we would chip in and buy a battery for it. The battery was the size of a Pullman loaf of bread. And there were still were lots of radio dramas on radio in those days. And talk radio hadn't been invented, thank goodness. There's a few of my books. The other thing I did, a previous Coast Guardsman had left a paint-by-number set, and the oil paints were still good. So I got a canvas rag out of the rag bag, and I tried to paint a sea scene. It turned out pretty good. I also brought my watercolors out with me one time, and I did a few watercolors, of course, all by either daylight or kerosene lamp. The event people like to hear about is the Hurricane Donna in 1960. I was home on Liberty. I got a phone call from Bristol, said return immediately to the lighthouse. Tex and John Gott were there to pick me up, and in Conimicut, and we were kind of off joking about. It's just, here's another storm we got to worry about that's going to go out to sea, and we'll never experience it. But this one definitely, we did experience this one. One of the things we said we'd do if the lights started to break up, we were going to make a life raft and float across the bay, and we'd end up on the Barrington shore, and we would go to one of the houses where there'd be a family with 3 teenage daughters, and they would take us in. That was the joke. So the water being the main culprit, the storm surge of a hurricane is the main damage creator. More than wind. So you see in this slide, you see the normal high tide line, the king or mood tide line, which happens spring and fall, and then you see the Hurricane Donna line. The water, the waves with the Hurricane Donna would break against the light, and the water would rush by that window that you see under the rain roof, and it would actually darken the kitchen. So much water would be going by when a big wave would break. And the wind would drive the water up the side of the tower, and the line that curves up would drive the water around the windows and drip in on the floor and had to be mopped up. One morning, the buoy boat came. Now this was the low, start again. This was the lowest manner of travel to the lighthouse, the least interesting. But when I went to the landing at the pier to take the bow line. A man ducked out from underneath the doghouse, and there was a lot of gold on his cap, and I kind of wondered what was going on. He was a lieutenant commander from Washington, D.C., in charge of aids to navigation on the East Coast, and he was there to look things over before we got our electricity. Over the clock in the galley, I had displayed this banner because we were still waiting for electricity. The promise was made every year, and it never happened. Also, over the doorway, as you came in, I had painted, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." He was not happy with my, I'll go back. He was not happy with my decorations. And he said to me, "If I come back tomorrow, I won't see that, will I?" And I said, "No, sir, you won't." So people sometimes ask, how did you manage to keep clean? Well, we did get to go ashore fairly frequently. If we had the full three-man crew, we could go aboard or go home 3 days. We would run 3 days out of 6. 6 days on, 3 days off. We did have a rubber bathtub that folded up like a camp cot. But there was only one guy that ever used it. It entailed heating water in every pot and pan, kettle we had on the gas stove, and then taking your bath and then bailing the thing out. It was very inconvenient. But as long as the weather was halfway decent, we could easily take a bath in the bay. We had saltwater soap, and so you would pump yourself a pail, 12-quart pail full of fresh water at the sink, take it out on the dock, down to the landing, jump in the bay, climb out, soap down, and the saltwater soap did make good suds. It smelled somewhat antiseptic. It was yellow like lye soap. Then you jump back in the water to rinse off, climb out, pour the fresh water over your head to wash the salt water off, and grab your towel, and you were done. One night, we did this mostly at night in the dark. One night as I was coming out after my soap down, I heard the sound of a boat engine, and sure enough there was a cabin cruiser going by, and they had heard the splash, and that had aroused their curiosity enough, so they turned the spotlight on to see what it was. And there I was in my birthday suit on stage in the spotlight. Well, that just about does it. You're more than welcome to come back anytime. I did get to go out in 22 when the grant was provided for the restoration of the light. My friends from Palmer Rock took me out. You can see the rust, and there's a lot of deterioration. While I'm at it, if you're really interested in becoming a lighthouse hunter. These two books from Jeremy are very good. And if you're into history of the United States and its lighthouses, this is the excellent book. Now, things that happened afterwards. In 2004, the city of Warwick was given title to the lighthouse. And they had wonderful ideas of what they were going to do with it. But they didn't. They didn't have the money, and they didn't have the interest. So it began to deteriorate badly. That's my workspace. Not just inside, outside too. You could see the vegetation growing in the gutter on the roof, rain roof, and around the edge of the caisson. And I was really afraid that this would be the future of Conimicut Light. But Congressman Langevin managed to get a federal block grant in 22, and since then the work was done by Abcor, the Scabo family. The Scabo family. And they took it down to the cast iron and redid it. So you see the work, you see as it stands today with its restoration. Well, thank you all. I'll go back to polishing my lens. That's it. There ain't no more.